After the attack on America Rising, Dan Rather reporting from CBS News World Headquarters in New York with Ed Bradley. On this National Day of Prayer and Remembrance, 4 p.m. now in the Eastern time zones, and President Bush is now here in New York City. He took a helicopter tour of the Ground Zero attack site in Lower Manhattan before going in person on the ground to the site, where persistent rain has been complicating the search effort for the thousands of missing. Roughly 5,000 missing. Earlier in Washington, President Bush led a prayer service at the National Cathedral. All living former presidents attended, except for the ailing Ronald Reagan. And here's what else is happening. Declaring a national emergency, the president ordered 50,000 reservists called to active duty. It may be the first of a number of calls. Later, we will see. CBS's Bob Orr reports the cockpit voice recorder from the plane that hit the Pentagon is badly damaged. It may prove little to investigators. On the other hand, it's a little early to say that conclusively. CBS's Jim Stewart reports 2 people who may have significant knowledge are in custody and are now said to be cooperating with the investigation. Both houses of Congress unanimously approved $40 billion for attack victims and the military. It will probably turn out to be a down payment on the eventual cost. The FBI says 4,000 agents are now working the case. For the latest on what's happening at the White House, we go to the White House and correspondent Bill Plant. Bill?
Dan, on this day of prayer and remembrance, with the president participating in that service earlier at the National Cathedral and now reaching out to the victims and the workers in New York City, he has also turned another corner by putting the nation on a war footing. The White House issued paper which explains the declaration of emergency. And in that declaration of emergency, there is the sentence that says there is a continuing and immediate threat of further attack. That, of course, would explain the continued very high security, which was something that popped up again yesterday, around the White House and around the president as he travels today. As we saw earlier in pictures from his trip to New York, his trip was shrouded in much more than the usual secrecy, a great deal of security. And here at the White House, streets around the perimeter of the executive mansion and the surrounding buildings remain shut down, and no pedestrians except people with government passes are allowed in. And as you just said, the president also authorized a call-up of reserves. We're told that the Pentagon so far, wants about 35,000 reservists. It will use them in this country to do search and rescue and to fly combat air patrols of the kind that are now being flown by Air Force pilots up and down the East Coast corridor. So things are far from normal here, Dan, and this presidency remains focused on not only healing, but on what we're told will be a very long-haul military effort against the people who perpetrated this awful, awful offense. Dan?
Bill Plant at the White House. This is the scene in New York City as President Bush goes about touring Ground Zero, that is the place where the World Trade Center's towers were. Work has not completely stopped in the area, but for all intents and purposes, there's a pause in the work that goes on, around the clock, and for the foreseeable future will be going on literally 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Conservative estimates is that the recovery, rescue, and cleanup effort will take at least a month, probably 2, and you'll find many, many people who think that it will take even longer than that, given the enormity of the job. But as with so many difficult jobs, it's one day at a time. One area checked out, then beginning to put into huge dump trucks the debris and hauling it away. It's laborious, it's grim, it's a very tough job, which is one reason President Bush is here today. 1, to see for himself. 2, to give support and encouragement to those who have to do the job. And 3, and perhaps as important as, or more important than the others, to symbolically be part of a national ring of remembrance. Ed Bradley.
Well, what the president is going to see, Dan, is most of us focus on the two towers of the World Trade Center that went down because they were certainly the largest buildings and the most dramatic. But he's going to see that in that area that he's touring, that there are 5 buildings that collapsed altogether. There are another 3 buildings in the area that are partially collapsed at the moment. And then there are 10 buildings that have either the appearance or the confirmation of some form of structural damage. And by that I mean not just damage to the facade, but damage to the structure. So that those would also be 10 buildings that they have to be concerned, will they be able to stand, or do they eventually have to come down as well? The White House has said that President Bush is going to visit some other sites in addition to Ground Zero. They're not saying where, but they have confirmed that he will go somewhere else. It suggests that perhaps he'll be going to a hospital or perhaps to one of the centers that have been set up for people who are still searching for their missing. But for obvious reasons, security being one of them, that they're not saying exactly what he's going to do other than this visit to Ground Zero.
Let's go back to Mika Brzezinski in Lower Manhattan. Mika.
Well, Dan, with the whir of U.S. military aircraft above you, I want to bring you another important part of the rescue effort. We've got some home video to show you. This was shot by a firefighter down at Ground Zero. Mounds of rubble being searched by canine units. These are dogs that are used to sniff out the scene. These canine units are vital in the recovery effort. These dogs are able to get into the scene, to climb over the rubble and the debris, and to quickly sniff out victims, help locate them, and help rescue workers get to them. And today, with the inclement weather, with the rain that we had, the heavy rains earlier today, the dogs had a very hard time. In fact, some of the canine units were pulled back a little bit because their noses, the noses of these dogs literally got stuffed up with soot and mud and debris. They were having a hard time down there, but of course there was many different units that were helping out. I spoke with 2 Suffolk County police officers this morning. They had dogs on the scene all night long, and you see here that they are back at it again. The good news is the sun is out. It came out about half an hour ago. It's drying up the situation here. It's going to be a great help. Again, we've got the 2 F-15s and 2 Chinook choppers flying above New York City, really adding to the atmosphere here for people who have really struggled. It's been a challenge for people in and around the area to adjust to what is happening around them. I don't know if you can hear them on my microphone, but there's a F-15 right above me. They're flying lower. This one's flying higher, so you can't feel it as well. But when they come in low, it's really loud. You feel the shaking around you. It's so loud. Again, this is just part of the situation now. The president's here. They're going to keep the president safe, the president a symbol of support and hope for the people that are helping in the recovery effort. Dan, back to you.
Mika Brzezinski. Let's go back to Russ Mitchell at the missing persons location here in Manhattan. Russ?
Dan, New York City officials tell me about 175 people came here to the Manhattan Armory behind me to file a missing persons report. That is down considerably from the past 2 days. Yesterday you had about 2,500 people who showed up here, 2,000 the day before. Despite the fact that the numbers are shrinking, city officials will keep the armory open on Saturday and Sunday at this point for anyone who still needs to come here. One of the people who came back is this gentleman right here. This is Dennis Levi. His father, police officer John Dennis Levi, was last seen on Tuesday morning. He was dispatched to the World Trade Center after the second plane crash. Is that correct?
Yes, he was.
When was the last time anyone in your family spoke with him?
A little after 10 o'clock, he made a phone call to us, and he was moving from one building to another, and that's the last we heard of him.
You were here yesterday where you actually filed the report. There are a number of family members of people at the World Trade Center who were at the World Trade Center milling about here. Why was it important for you to come back despite the fact that you wanted to get some more information?
They had a different list that most hospitals didn't have that we thought we might be able to check, but everybody on that list was accounted for.
This also appears to be a gathering place for you. Why come back? Do you meet other families and talk to people?
Just there's no place else to go but the hospitals and here, and we just have to keep going around. Maybe he'll pop up somewhere he wasn't on a list, or maybe he was not accounted for earlier, that he might show up on a list now that he wasn't on before. So we just keep going back to and checking every list. It's the only thing we can do.
I've asked this question of other folks who have been here in your situation. What continues to give you hope?
The people that we talk to at the Port Authority are very, very cooperative, and helped us out a lot, and they've told us that there are still people down there that are alive, and hopefully he's one of them.
Tell me about your dad.
He was a good man. He was a type of person that would like run into the place instead of running away from it. We know that he was in the building when I think it was number 2 collapsed. He was in the basement.
We wish you the best, Dennis Levy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Dan, as we've been telling you for the past 2 days, there are thousands of stories down here exactly like this, and what's really remarkable is these folks continue to be optimistic. They continue to have lots of hope. Back to you.
How I get it out of Yoda. Russ Mitchell. Joining us now is Dr. Rachel Cueva of Mount Sinai's post-traumatic stress program. Doctor, thank you for being with us. If I've mispronounced your name, please correct me now.
Thank you. It's Jeanette Cueva, and I'm actually the chief of the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Outpatient Program at St. Vincent's Hospital.
Thank you. Doctor, what is the most common problem that you face this week with people directly involved with this tragedy?
Well, obviously grief, but I think one of the things that I just want to clarify in terms of grief counseling, a lot of the people that we are seeing and will be seeing are not, quote-unquote patients. They're regular folks like you, like me, that have been devastated by what's happened. I think a lot of people, including many of us, go through periods of dissociation or numbing from the shock. And then when they're over that phase, you start seeing a lot of sadness, a lot of grief, and things like that. And we're trying to help counsel people and allow them to discuss their experiences.
Ed?
I met with some families this morning, and I'm sure that this is a situation that you see all across the city. The wife of a man who was missing was sitting there clinging to hope, saying, I can't give up hope because I know he's out there. Her sisters were a step removed, but being supportive of her. The brothers were saying, we're just looking for closure. They've given up hope, but they want to find the body so they can have closure. You've got 3 different levels of grief there. How do you deal with that? And you must be seeing it 1,000 times a day.
Yes, well, we're seeing it not quite as much as that yet, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more of it as time passes by. I think that right now we need to allow people to experience this in the way that they need to do it. So if they're at the level of hope is always an important thing to have. I mean, these 2 firemen just got out yesterday. So you can't take that away from people. So I think it's very important, especially right now and initially, to allow people to express themselves at whatever level that they're at.
Doctor, what about the children?
That's an excellent question, Dan. We have counseled a few children that have been exposed to this directly. For example, there are a couple of kids that came in from PS 89. One child that was seen today came in. His school is right across the street from Stuyvesant. And parents are starting to bring their children in initially right now because they're not talking about what they're seeing, and the parents are very worried about that.
Should they be worried about that?
Well, I think I can understand why they're worried, because somehow at some point it's going to come out if they don't talk about this at all. So yes, they should be if it doesn't come out at all. This child that came in today didn't discuss one word of this with his parents, but once this child was in the session, he couldn't stop talking about what he had seen, what he had experienced. And I believe that maybe a reason that he couldn't bring it up at home is that he needed not to talk about this and have a safe place at home, not talking about this all the time. In fact, one of the things that he had mentioned is that he wants to see normal TV. There's all of these images on television, and we suggested, well, maybe go out to the video store and get something that he likes.
Well, Doctor, you were down at the Family Center at the New School where people went to see if they could find the name of a missing relative or a friend and see which hospital that they were in. What did you and your colleagues see?
Well, To give you an example, one example, there was a gentleman who came in, and this is something a colleague of mine saw, came in with a picture of, I believe it was his brother, and came up to my colleague, and there were some people who had perished in this tragedy at the morgue, and was asking, pleading with him, can you please take this picture and bring it to one of the bodies and see if this is my brother. And of course we couldn't do that, but it's to that level of just wanting to know what's going on.
Doctor, I've heard these stories. Ed, who's been working outside today, heard some. I mean, these incredible scenes where someone says, describe your relative to me, describe your wife or your husband. Did they bite their fingernails? Mm-hmm. Did they have a small scar on the hand? This is absolutely heartbreaking, gut-wrenching stuff.
It is. It's going to be very difficult for us to get over this tremendous tragedy, and it's going to take a very, very long time.
What about people who weren't directly affected, who didn't have anyone at the World Trade Center, didn't have anyone in the area, may not even be in the city, but wherever they are now, they sense that something is different about this country and in some way feel threatened. We saw a woman who flies for American Airlines. She doesn't want to fly because she's insecure. Mm-hmm. What about those people? What do you say to them?
I think that it's very important for them and for people here, but also for them to try to talk about what they're feeling, as simple and trite as that might sound. And it doesn't have to be to a professional. It could be to someone that they trust, to talk about how they're feeling about this and how this has affected all of us. This is something that even if you're not here directly in New York, this is a tragedy for all Americans and all of the people that live here. Has affected us to a level that, again, you know, just to repeat myself, it's going to take a very long time for us to heal and get over this.
Doctor, your specialty is adult and child psychiatry. You're board certified in that. We had on the air earlier this morning from Dallas an airline cabin attendant who said she wanted to do her duty, wanted to do her job. She went to the airport and she got through security too easily, and she just said, I'm not going to fly. And she said, in effect, I'm scared to death. How widespread do you think this problem will be? She's thousands of miles removed from the actual site of the tragedy.
I think this is an example of how vulnerable we're all feeling, especially in terms of going on an airplane. I know I'm feeling vulnerable about that. I'm feeling scared about that. I have a flight coming up a month from now, and I'm, you know, it's very frightening. And I think one of the ways that the country can address this is to beef up the security like we are doing. I think we all need to, and this is for the children as well, obviously, to have a sense that the country is doing something to improve the safety. And, you know, just as an example, a lot of the children are wanting to hear that from their parents, from their teachers. Are we safe? Are we safe? We're hearing a lot of that. So that's one of the things that we could do.
What's interesting about the children, I come back to that because, you know, everybody, almost everybody either has children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews. On the one hand, you want the children to become educated in schools. You don't want to lie to them. I mean, with parents, what do you do? On the one hand, you want to make the child feel secure. You've emphasized it's important for the child to feel safe. I mean, should you hug the child 3 times as much as you normally do? How do you do this as a practical matter?
Well, you could do that if it makes you and the child feel better. But I think one of the things that's important to do is that if a child wants to talk about this, to allow them to talk about this. And if they want some information about this, parents can give them some information and not talk about it if they really want to talk about it.
You said that some kids want regular TV back. What is the impact of seeing these images day after day? Seeing the plane going into the World Trade Center, seeing the towers come tumbling down?
I think overexposure can really be continual traumas. if you will, just seeing this at all times. On the
I wouldn't
one
think there's any way that could be healthy for a child.
No, it's not for any of us. I think it's important for all of us, the children and also the adults, to take a break. It's important for the parents and the teachers to process this amongst each other so that we can be emotionally stable enough to deal with our children.
Well, Dr. Janet Cueva, thank you very much for coming in from St. Vincent's Hospital.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you.
Let's go now to Cheryl Atkinson in Washington with the latest in the flight data recorders that have not been recovered yet. Cheryl, you'll be talking over pictures of the area where President Bush is visiting, but what new information do you have for us here?
There are quite a few different things going on. Let's bring you up to date on all of the flight data recorders, the ones that they have, the ones that they don't have. There are more missing pieces than links, as you can imagine at this point in the investigation. For the United Airlines Flight 93, the 757 that crashed in Pennsylvania, authorities have found the flight data recorder there. It was buried 15 feet under in that crash site. There was a software glitch on that, though. They don't necessarily think they have lost all of the data on that. They just haven't been able to retrieve it yet. They're still trying. American Airlines Flight 77, the 757 that crashed into the Pentagon, the flight data recorder has been recovered. The data that they can get may not be the most helpful, however. What they'll be able to tell from that is whether or not the plane did fly over the White House, did fly over the Capitol, as some people had reported, before it crashed into the Pentagon. That can tell the plane's movements. What they really wanted to hear was the cockpit voice recorder. That, too, has been found, but the bad news and the big news today about that, it's so burned it may in fact be useless. Authorities are going to try to get some data off of that, but again, the cockpit voice recorder from the Pentagon crash is so badly damaged, authorities really don't know if they'll be able to recover anything from that. They're all waiting to see if we do find the cockpit voice recorder from the United 93 flight in Pennsylvania. The voice recorder from that Pennsylvania crash could be key in providing investigative information that authorities need to find out exactly what was happening in the last minutes of that flight. There seems to be no real thought that they'll be able to recover meaningful data if they at all find the black boxes from the World Trade Center crashes. I also want to briefly bring you up to date on some of the latest information that the FBI has been telling us here in Washington, D.C. As many of our viewers know, if they've been watching, the FBI released a list of 19 men identified as hijackers aboard the airliners and are now asking for people with information about these men, even though they are all now presumed dead. If anyone has information about them and who they were and who they may have associated with, they're asked to call the FBI. The FBI has also given a list of more than 100 names of other people to numerous law enforcement organizations, the FAA, the airlines, FBI field offices, police departments across America. The FBI thinks the names on this list could have information that's helpful to the investigation. They're not calling them suspects. They're saying they simply want to talk to these people. The FBI has an unbelievable force working on the case, 4,000 special agents. Also, says the FBI, 3,000 support employees. There are 56 FBI offices around the country and 20 around the world that are having conference calls several times a day to try to coordinate the information. That's been a complaint in the past about the FBI, that they have not properly coordinated information from field offices. This is a big test to see how they've changed those procedures and if it's all working out properly this time. Dan?
Cheryl Atkinson, as you look at pictures live from Lower Manhattan, the President Bush's motorcade slowly making its way. You'll see the president out of the motorcade as time goes along. Obviously, a lot of thought went into the decision of when to bring President Bush here, when to have him visit. Yes, it would slow down, if not stop, the rescue and recovery effort for at least a bit, but those who made the decision, including the president himself who made the final decision, had to weigh that against the value of bringing support and encouragement, not just to the workers, the many workers who are giving so much down there, but also to the city as a whole, and for that matter to the nation, a symbol of a president who cares, a president who's working to bring the nation in unity to not only a day of prayer and remembrance, but also a day of determination to do what has to be done, to bring justice to those who perpetrated a cowardly crime. As you can see, the rain has let up considerably in the last few minutes. In fact, just about the time the president arrived, the rain began slacking off some. It had been reasonably heavy through most of the morning.
That was making what was already a tough job tougher. That was making what was already a tough job tougher, because it makes that material they have to move out. One, it makes it heavier. Two, it also then becomes slippery. Footing is slippery for the men and the women who are working in there, because they've got to climb through that stuff. But as Mika reported, the sun is shining now, so I know they welcome that.
Well, as President Bush makes this morale-boosting visit to the site, it perhaps needs to be italicized that there is a grim reality that permeates all of this. And part of that grim reality is that for a second, well, yea, third, and now moving into fourth straight day, no survivors are emerging from the debris. There is hope, yet hope, that some survivors may yet be found. I always point out that in the case of the Murrah building blast in Oklahoma City, someone was found alive in the debris after 15 days or so. But that was a almost completely different kind of situation. Nonetheless, there is hope clinging by the proverbial fingernails that maybe somebody could still be alive in there. And the crews, when they were working, many of them pausing now to be greeted by the president or just to see the president, but the crews occasionally are halting all work to listen for any noise, a sharp knock or muffled voice that might lead them to a survivor.
But what they have to confront today, Dan, is as much hope as they do have. The reality is that they have found no one today, that they found no one yesterday. The two firemen that Dr. Cueva referred to were firemen who were lost yesterday morning performing rescue operations, and not firemen who were in the building on Tuesday when it came down.
We want to bring into this, as we continue to watch the pictures of President Bush on his visit to New York City, our veteran White House correspondent, Bill Plant. Bill?
Dan, this is a day on which the president is balancing two of his leadership roles: the humanitarian role, which we see in progress as he visits and tries to comfort the people who have lost and who are working so valiantly to try and recover those who, as Ed just noted, don't seem to have survived, and his role as commander-in-chief. U.S. presidents wear many hats, of course, and the president is not only the leader of his party and the head of state and the head of government, he's also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and in this case, we've been promised that he is going to act as commander-in-chief as soon as he knows exactly where the U.S. must apply its might. It's an interesting position because Americans expect their presidents to be not only all of the things that I just mentioned, but they also expect their presidents to be inspirational. That's part of what this president is doing today. Americans want to be led by somebody they can look up to. So the role of a president is very tricky. It goes way beyond the politics of any situation. And I think we find that by going to New York today, the president is trying very much to take that role seriously. But as we've talked earlier about today, he has many other things on his plate, some very serious decisions to make. He's already authorized the calling out of the reserves and declared a national emergency. And we've already been told that we face a continued immediate threat of further attack. We don't know what that means. It's a bit unsettling, to be sure. But we watch around the White House and see that the security perimeter has been extended. There's no traffic. There are no pedestrians. So it's still a very uncertain time. Dan?
Bill, one of the things that used to be taught in America's classrooms, for all I know it's still taught in some, although I have a sense less than it once was, is an important fact about our system of government, and that is that a president of the United States is both head of state and head of government. In England, you have the Queen, who's head of state, the Prime Minister, who's head of government. In the parliamentary system, that's the way it is. But the founding fathers of this country made the President of the United States. They didn't want to have a king. Washington insisted, we don't want a king. We don't want royalty in this country. And it complicates the role, not just for the president, but it complicates an understanding of the role of the president and the role of the presidency in American government and life. That the president is a combined head of state and head of government, in the sense that he's head of the executive branch of our government.
Well, Dan, that's right, and that points up what is going on right now. The public expects a president, in effect, to be all things to all people. And at a time like this, that really is tested.
Joining us here in our New York studio as we continue to watch these pictures of President Bush's visit around Lower Manhattan, and emphasizing the president will be going to some other locations unknown at the moment, locations such as a hospital, a missing persons center, that kind of thing. We're joined now by the spiritual leader of the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood of New York City, Imam al-Hajj Talib Abdur Rashid. You're welcome here, Imam.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. How is the American Muslim community, as best you can judge it, reacting to this terrible time?
In a few different ways. The predominant emotions and sentiments in the Muslim community are common with the rest of the people in the society. Same shock, same sorts of grief and anger, common emotions. However, there are a few other emotions that are running through our community. Apprehension, fear, a kind of nervousness, because there has been backlash directed toward our faith community as the result of these events that have resulted in some physical attacks upon people. We have reports of fatalities, etc. So there's a whole gamut of emotions being experienced by Muslims at this time.
I want to pick up that conversation, but just now direct our attention, because we have close-up pictures of President Bush greeting these marvelous, and yes, I'll use the word noble workers. Of course, we can't pick up the sound as such of what's being said. But just for at least a few moments, let's watch as the president absorbs the moment, talks to those who are there, and looks around. A thumbs up, President. One doesn't have to be a lip reader to know that among the things that pointing was about, pointing out that there are buildings in the immediate area about which there have been concerns that some of them might topple, although the latest information is that the structural integrity of those buildings is holding.
And given the size of the man who was doing the pointing, although I can't see his face, I think that's probably Governor Pataki.
It's almost certainly Governor Pataki there to the left with the baseball cap on.
And obviously Mayor Giuliani is there, and the chief of police in the baseball hat, the fire commissioner in the hard fire hat standing just to the right of the president.
Governor Pataki went to Yale with President Bush. They know each other well. Their wives know each other Well, Senator Schumer, now the senior senator in New York, Chuck Schumer, Hillary Rodham Clinton being the junior senator from New York. And Mom, this would give us an opportunity to ask you, I know you can't speak for the entire Muslim community, large and diverse in this country, but in general, how do they feel about President Bush?
At this time or in general?
No, at this time.
At this time, again, and I have in fact been in touch with Muslim leaders from different parts of the country. We've been on the phone with each other really since this happened, and there is an appreciation for the president's sense of restraint insofar as our faith community is concerned. But there's an appreciation for that.
And the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, till recently Senator from Missouri, but now Attorney General, made a point at his briefing yesterday saying, listen, I want to, in effect, say, I want to pause and say that it's not the American way to stereotype our fellow Americans of Muslim faith, and that we want to be careful to guard against unfair, perhaps even illegal outbursts against them in this period of high emotional feelings in the country.
Undoubtedly, this is one of the lessons actually learned from the previous administration, because you might remember when the Oklahoma bombing occurred, before the identity of Timothy McVeigh and other people was discovered, the first response was to blame the Muslim community. And there were some outbreaks of violence and what have you then as well.
Seeing Mayor Giuliani here with President Bush and Governor Pataki and with Senator Chuck Schumer, I'm not sure, is that, I'm not sure
like
Senator Clinton is there. Yes, there's a shot of her. So with blonde hair, but wasn't absolutely certain that was she. But seeing Mayor Giuliani here, have you met the mayor? Do you know the mayor? Have you talked with him about some of these problems we've been discussing?
I've met him once, have not talked with him at all, really.
You also have, Dan, some members of the New York's congressional delegation. Congressman Gerald Nadler from the west side of New York, talking now with President Bush. And just out of the picture, what we saw him a minute before was Congressman Charles Rangel, one of the senior members of the Democratic delegation from New York.
Well, in addition to support, encouragement, President Bush is bringing to New York in effect today about $20 billion commitment to rebuilding New York for help. And when people talk about, it seems a little awkward ever to talk about money in these kinds of situations, but when people mention the economy and possible recession and New York itself going into a down economic period, one's reminded after Hurricane Andrew in South Florida, when they had $15 billion plus damage in the wake of Hurricane Andrew, that yes, you know, business went down for a bit, the economy went down for a bit, but a combination of taxpayer money, insurance money pumped into the economy brought South Florida not just back, but zooming back to what could only be called a boom condition, partly as a result of rebuilding in the wake of Hurricane Andrew. Now, this is a different situation, but worth keeping that in mind. As the mayor is surrounded by the hardworking people who are engaged in the rescue and recovery effort, we see these pictures. We also bring in Bob Schieffer from Washington. Bob?
You know, Dan, I'm very interested in hearing you and the imam and your conversations. I was just talking to some officials at the State Department just a short time ago, and they were stressing that one of the messages that they will be sending out, and that one of the cornerstones in U.S. policy in all of this, is to stress that this is not a war against Islam. This is a war against terrorists. And I think you're going to hear officials stressing that over and over. This is a war against terrorists and against those who wish this country ill. It's not against a particular people, and certainly not against those of any particular religious faith.
Ed Bradley?
Imam, let me ask you your reaction when you see pictures, as we've seen, particularly Tuesday night and Wednesday, of people on the West Bank, some Palestinians, celebrating, reacting with glee to what they saw happen here in this country. Your reaction?
Well, that's probably one of the most misunderstood images that I've seen over the past few days. Actually, those people responding much the same as the American people responded when they saw Iraq being bombed and that sort of thing. And people on both sides of the water are making a kind of common fundamental mistake, and that is that they are necessarily associating the actions of a government with the common people in the street. There are many people in Palestine and elsewhere who see American foreign policy as causing a great deal of grief in their lives. And so unfortunately, when something happens like what took place a few days ago, they're looking at this more of kind of a hit at the government as opposed to understanding how many thousands of people's lives this affects.
Imam, Bob Schieffer was making the point that the State Department has made clear today that one of the things it's underscoring when it's seeking support for dealing with terrorism is it's a war, but it's not a war directed at Islam. It's a war directed specifically at terrorism and terrorists. Now, the other end of that is, and we need to deal with it, I think, directly, a sense among many Americans heightened by what has happened here that somehow, some way that Islam has declared war on America a long time ago. And I'd be interested in having you address that perhaps, well, unjustified fear, but very real concern and fear.
Of course, it's a very real concern, and it's really a complex issue, because the fact of the matter is that we here in America, we really know very little about other parts of the world and other ways of life, other people's beliefs and what have you. So, in fact, there are a great many stereotypes that kind of lurk in the back of the American psyche, and the very volatile political world in which we live kind of heightens these fears and brings the stereotypes boiling to the surface. I mean, again, Timothy McVeigh was raised as a Roman Catholic, but when it was discovered that it was him, no one blamed the church. No one threw rocks at the church. No one harassed Catholics. It was seen as an individual act of an individual person. But this has not been the case with Islam. So it's a very complex issue.
It is indeed. Imam, I'm glad you're with us here, and please stick with us. We're bouncing back and forth from a lot of aspects of our coverage.
Sure.
We can't pick up much, if any, of the sound of what's happening, but let's just pause and take in this picture here of the President of the United States completely engulfed by a sea of workers who've been doing this grim, hard work down there. Might be able to pick up some of the sound. Let's give it a try. Well, it's just not there. There's so many people from so many walks of American life and with so many skills from so many crafts, disciplines, and professions. I regret that we just simply can't list them all, partly because in some cases we don't know them all. Senator Chuck Schumer explaining something to President Bush there with Senator Clinton between the two of them, and with members of the New York congressional delegation veteran Charlie Rangel asking Senator Chuck Schumer, who used to be in the House of Representatives, got promoted by the voters to senator. Very animated conversation here, Ed Bradley.
It looked to me like Senator Schumer was telling him about a building that either had come down or was in danger of coming down. It's interesting, the members of the congressional delegation, because I'm not sure that that's Congressman Nadler's district. I know he represents, I don't know the boundaries of his district. Charlie Rangel's central district is Harlem and northern Manhattan, but it does stretch down the island. The same thing with Nadler's, who has mostly the west side.
Well, that's a good point, Ed, but I would, under rather rough, loose rule of Washington power, that power is in direct proportion to proximity, and the fact that they put Nadler this close, right at the president's right elbow, tells me that he's in his district. Now, I don't know myself where the exact line is, but if you get paid for a while to look at things in Washington and say, well, okay, what's the protocol? It's a pretty strong reason to believe that
that's why he's there.
That's why he's right at the president's elbow on the right-hand side. And of course, Charlie Rangel is in the upper tiers of seniority in the entire House of Representatives, and that would explain his immediate proximity to the president. Not to mention that he also represents a district which, while it doesn't include this area, is very close to it in Harlem, which is a part of Manhattan, of course. You know, one reason we pause here is that every time you concentrate on these pictures, it's so stunning that it almost literally takes your breath away.
And I've been told that the pictures don't even convey the stark reality of what's there. It's even much worse when you're actually there.
They don't. That my role has not been to report on scene, but having made it my professional business as a journalist to get down at least on the edges of it, I can bear personal witness to the fact that it's one of those things you have to walk the ground to get a full appreciation for the devastation and also for the enormity of the job. Said it before, say it again. In the same way from what we say, look, no one should underestimate the enormity of the challenge that our beloved United States of America is taking on when we say we are going to wipe out terrorism. No one should underestimate what a gigantic challenge it is just to clear away this situation in Lower Manhattan and begin rebuilding.
There are a lot of people who've stopped whatever it was they're doing and are around the president and his party, but as you can clearly see, there are a lot of people there who are still working, still trying to clear away this debris.
As we look down on the scene where some of the work is being resumed as the president continues his tour, I want to show you on videotape maybe 35, 40 seconds of the view the president got by helicopter. This is the view the president got as he flew on the flyover before coming down to the helicopter pad. The president was in the helicopter. This is his view of what he was about to see from ground level.
Yeah.
And then this is the view you see if you're high atop one of the buildings in the area. This presidential visit, we don't know how long it will last. It's going to last for a while longer because the president clearly has not completed what he wants to do at ground zero. And we're told that he does plan to visit some other places. For security reasons, we're not going to reveal those.
You
the fact is we don't actually know specifically in detail what they are. But
it sort of suggests that he might visit a hospital, but there are a number of hospitals that are being used. He might visit a center. There are a number of centers being used, so we can't say with any clarity exactly which one.
As this is going on, pardon me, Ed, but as this is happening, there are some developments at Los Angeles International Airport. So we go to Sandra Hughes for a voiceover report from Los Angeles. Sandra?
Dan, we have just been informed that San Francisco International Airport has halted all takeoff and landings because of a threat. Now, this threat was apparently made by a man in a boat. The threat, apparently, he is saying he wants to bring down a plane. Now, that is all we know at this point, and we'll get you more information and bring you that later. There are some jitters, though, here at Los Angeles International as well. Not too long ago, 2 passengers described by police as suspicious looking were prevented from boarding a flight to Washington Dulles Airport and were detained. Police have let them go, though, at this point. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Sandra. Well, this kind of thing is bound to happen and keep happening at least for a while. For security reasons, when they get a report of some threat, one simply has to respond to it.
I'm never coming back. What? No, I'm kidding.
We return now to Lower Manhattan and some of the devastation that President Bush is seeing as he tours.
As they're still trying to clear away some of that rubble, just to give you a sense of the enormity of the job. And I think we said from the beginning when the estimates were that this could be done in a month to 60 days. It was overly optimistic. So far, they've cleared away 10,425 tons of material. And when you look at it, it looks like they barely have made a dent. But they've taken more than 10,000 tons of material out of there.
And it looks like they've barely made a dent because, in fact, they have barely made a dent. The Imam has left us now. What an interesting conversation that was, Ed Bradley. And as we go along with our coverage this day and evening, we want to come back to some of the points covered in that discussion with the Imam about the Muslim community in this country.
Well, it's interesting to look at it from the perspective of someone else. When we look at a society that is different, a culture that is different, and that culture looks at us differently. And it's always good to get the perspective of someone else.
Let's bring Bob Schieffer again into this. Bobby, from Capitol Hill, I know it's maybe difficult for you to see all of the pictures, but there's a combination of smog and fog as the day heats up a little bit that's beginning to descend eerily on Ground Zero here in Manhattan.
Well, Ground Zero looks like something from World War II. I mean, there's no question about that. Getting back, you're talking about the Imam and how interesting it is to get that perspective. The Imam represents a religion now that is one of the largest religions in this country. I think, and check me if I'm wrong, I think there are probably more Muslims in this country now than Presbyterians, or perhaps some of our larger Protestant sects.
I'm not sure about Presbyterians, Bob, but I believe it's authority to say that there are more Muslims in the United States now than there are Episcopalians.
Almost twice as many.
Almost twice as many.
It's the fastest growing religion, I believe, in the country at this time. These scenes are just overwhelming, Dan. I mean, you look at them, you see them, and then you come back and see them again, and they're worse than you remembered they were. And having this rain now, and I mean, we're talking about this $20 billion. You kind of look at this, that is going to be a down payment, isn't it?
Well, it's way out of my depth to make such an estimate, but just looking at it, you'd have to say, yes, it's a down payment on it. But as I understand it, Bob, and perhaps in your conversations with people up on the Hill, you've confirmed this, that the original intention of President Bush and those at the White House was to get a $20 billion allocation for combined rebuilding and what the military might need. And then after discussions with the New York, at least portions of the New York congressional and senatorial delegation meeting at the White House with the 2 senators and congressmen, in effect, the president and those around him were told, listen, we need $20 billion in and around New York. Now, not to say that New York's going to get the entire $20 billion, but I'm told that at that point was when the president and the people around him, in consultation with the leaders of both houses of Congress, said, well, we'll just double it because we're going to need so much for the military and other aspects of pursuing these terrorists, and together what it's going to take to rebuild New York. So they doubled it to the $40 billion figure.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what Senator Clinton told me last night. Senator Clinton, Senator Schumer, and some of the other members of the New York delegation had a private meeting last evening with the president. They made their case. They said, Mr. President, it's going to take $20 billion just to get started on New York. And apparently the president said, if that's what you're telling me, that's what we're going to do. And then there were larger meetings. The other congressional people were brought in, and before the night was out, they'd agreed to double this appropriation. And then, as we talked about earlier today, Dan, in a kind of event that I can never recall happening here, by a unanimous vote, both the House and Senate passed an appropriations bill, and that's talking about passed a bill that will be spending U.S. tax dollars, $40 billion.
Sandra Hughes reports from Los Angeles that the San Francisco airport, which was closed for a while because of a threat, a possible threat from a man in a boat, has now reopened. And this is a pattern again. It's inevitable. Bob Schieffer's a version of what we had yesterday at the Capitol, that somebody perceived a possible bomb threat to the Senate. Nobody quite knew what to do about it, but under the circumstances, they had to take it seriously, so they evacuated the Capitol while they determined fairly quickly, well, it wasn't actually a threat. And the same thing, a similar thing, has now happened with the San Francisco airport. This is just part of what we're going to have to live with, when I say for a while, perhaps for a long while.
Well, we went through this all day yesterday here, Dan, not just at the Capitol, but at other buildings in Washington. These bomb threats would be called in, and as I understand it, they were going through very similar things during the day yesterday in New York. I know the building where my daughter works was evacuated at one point during the day. Other buildings around Times Square. The night before, apartment houses around Manhattan had been evacuated. It's sad to say, and one wonders what kind of a mind would find some amusement or find this an interesting thing to do, but it does happen after we have these cataclysmic events, and I think we just have to go through it for a while.
Bob, it was worth mentioning, not only is it an inconvenience and unfair, it's also a crime.
Yes.
And anybody who thinks, well, it's the sort of thing they never pursue, that might have been the case before Tuesday, but in the wake of Tuesday, anybody who's thinking of pulling such a, quote, prank, unquote, in this atmosphere should be reminded not only is it a crime, but it's considered a fairly serious crime, both under federal statutes and in most states. So anybody who's even thinking about doing such a thing might want to keep that very much in mind. Ed Bradley?
What we couldn't hear with the president's visit down there, Dan, the men and women who were working were, some of them chanting, USA, USA. We saw the big American flag hanging from one of those buildings. President Bush, we're told by one of the reporters traveling with that tight pool that's around the president there, that he said, thank you for your hard work. Thank you for making the nation proud, and may God bless America. He also said the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon. And the chant, USA, USA, came back at him when he said that.
Well, we've mentioned it before. With that in mind, we perhaps should mention again that Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld opened a cabinet meeting with a prayer this morning, cabinet meeting with the president there, asking for, quote, patience to measure our lust for action, resolve to strengthen our obligation to lead, wisdom to illuminate our pursuit of justice, and strength in defense of liberty. unquote. Well, the afternoon slides away. Coming up soon, 5 o'clock in the Eastern Time Zone, as President Bush goes through his tour of Lower Manhattan. You're watching continuing CBS News coverage of Attack on America.
This is a 9 Eyewitness News special report. America.